It was my mother's birthday. Potluck dinner, warm lights strung through the backyard, and laughter that filled the evening air like a comfort I'd always taken for granted. And then, just like that, I heard it. Honestly, Adam was the biggest mistake I ever made. The voice was low, conspiratorial, coated in sugar, and unmistakably Jenny's. My wife. She was leaning toward her brother Luke, red wine dancing dangerously close to the rim of her glass. Her lips curled into that smug little smirk she always reserved for moments when she thought she was being clever. I was standing barely 6 feet away, just close enough to hear, just far enough that she thought I couldn't. For a moment, everything froze. The paper plate in my hand crinkled from how tight my fingers curled around it. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. Luke chuckled uncomfortably, glancing around like he knew she'd gone too far, but didn't have the backbone to stop her. Jenny kept smiling. That perfect, polished, public smile she wore like armor. She had no idea I'd hurt her. No idea I was watching her talk about our marriage like it was a bad tattoo, something impulsive, regrettable, best laughed off over drinks. I didn't interrupt. I didn't confront. Instead, I turned away. Slowly, silently. The baked beans on my plate sloshed against the potato salad, and I felt a strange kind of calm settle over me. I'd always wondered what betrayal would feel like. Turns out, it's not loud. It doesn't slap you in the face or scream in your ears. It whispers, and the whisper is what haunts you. I found a quiet corner near the grill, tucked behind the patio, and stood there for a while, letting the noise of my family wash over me. My mother's laugh, my uncle arguing about football, the kids chasing bubbles near the fence. Everything around me was ordinary, but inside me, something had broken. Jenny had always been a sharp, not unkind, exactly, just someone who wielded words the way others used knives. Precise, effective, lethal when she wanted to be. And now I knew she wanted to be. I stared at her from across the yard. That same woman who once said I made her feel safe, who once cried in my arms during thunderstorms, who used to draw tiny hearts on napkins when I packed her lunch for work. She was laughing now, oblivious, clinking glasses with Luke like she hadn't just lit our entire marriage on fire with one sentence. And I stood there, plate in hand, silent, because there wasn't a scene to make. Not tonight, not here. She'd think I didn't hear. She'd keep smiling, keep pretending, and I'd let her, because this wasn't the kind of pain you shouted about. It was the kind that settled in your bones. The kind that didn't need an audience. You ever have one of those moments where something inside you snaps, but not in anger, more like a thread pulling loose in a sweater you've worn too long? That was me. I still cut the cake that night, still handed out slices. I even took a photo of Jenny laughing with my niece. But something had changed. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. All I knew was I wouldn't forget, and I wouldn't stay the same. The next morning, the house smelled like cinnamon toast and fresh coffee. You'd never know a bomb had gone off the night before. Jenny hummed softly at the stove, flipping pancakes like everything was fine, like she hadn't torn a piece of me out with a few careless words. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, watching her from behind my coffee's rising fog. She wore the same robe she always did on weekends, blue plaid, slightly frayed at the sleeve. She looked soft, familiar, but every movement felt rehearsed now, like I was watching a performance I'd seen too many times. She turned, caught my eye, and smiled. "Sleep okay?" My throat tightened. I nodded. I wanted to tell her what I'd heard. Wanted to see her face when she realized I knew. But something held me back, not fear, not weakness, something colder. She poured syrup over her pancakes like it was any other Saturday. "Plans today?" she asked. I sipped my coffee. It tasted bitterer than usual. "Not much, but I do think we should talk." Her smile barely wavered. "About what?" I looked her right in the eye. "About counseling." The spatula froze midair. "Counseling?" she repeated, voice light, feigned confusion curling at the edges. "Why would we need that?" I set my mug down gently, careful not to let the sound echo too loud. "Because I overheard something hurtful last night." Her eyes flicked to mine, just for a second too long. "What did you hear?" I didn't answer. Not directly. I just held her gaze, calm and steady. She tilted her head slightly, that practiced mix of concern and amusement. "Adam, are you really going to get all worked up over some out-of-context nonsense?" You know how my brother and I joke around. Still calm. Still steady. I'm not worked up. I'm just suggesting we talk to someone. Together. Jenny's laugh was sharp. Too sharp. You're serious? I nodded. She turned away, dropping the spatula into the sink. We don't need counseling. We're not one of those couples who run to therapists over every little bump. There it was. The arrogance. The dismissal. The quiet confirmation that whatever damage she caused, she didn't believe it mattered. I didn't argue. Instead, I stood, rinsed my mug, and wiped down the counter like it was just another morning chore. But in my chest, something new was settling. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to shout. I was going to rebuild myself, without her permission. She thought my silence was surrender. She thought ignoring my request would erase the hurt. But that's where she was wrong. Because beneath this calm, I was sharpening something she couldn't see, my clarity. The kitchen filled with soft morning light. Our home looked the same. Same pots on the rack, same ticking wall clock, same 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom cup. But inside me, the lines were shifting. This wasn't about saving the marriage anymore. This was about reclaiming myself. I glanced at Jenny as she scrolled through her phone, probably texting someone who thought she was funny, clever, confident. And she was all those things. But she wasn't mine anymore. Not really. And soon, she'd realize that. I didn't tell Jenny where I was going. I didn't slam the door or leave some cryptic note to stir her curiosity. I just left. The counseling office was tucked away in an old building downtown, the kind that had real wood floors and quiet hallways that smelled faintly of lavender and worn paper. I stepped into the waiting room and took a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like I had to wear armor. The counselor's name was Marion. Mid-50s, soft eyes, a voice like a warm blanket pulled over your shoulders after a hard storm. She didn't ask me to start from the beginning, just motioned for me to sit, and when I did, it felt like I'd set something heavy down. I'm not here to rage, I told her. I'm not here to blame. She nodded gently. Good. Then let's begin with where you are now. That question hung in the air for a moment. Where was I? I stared at the polished wooden floor, then up at the bookshelves lining her office. Neatly stacked paperbacks with titles about forgiveness, resilience, silence. I'm somewhere between a decision and a memory, I said quietly. She didn't speak, just waited. So I told her everything. Not just about what Jenny said at the party, but about what it did to me. The fracture it caused. The quiet mornings. The mocking refusal when I offered peace through counseling. And I talked about Jenny, not just her betrayal, but how I'd slowly allowed myself to shrink in that marriage. How I'd made my discomfort seem noble. How I'd mistaken tolerance for love. Did you love her? Marion asked gently. I think I loved who she was when she needed me, I said. But the moment I started needing her, something changed. That truth hit harder than I expected. Marion nodded like she'd heard it 1,000 times. Maybe she had. You're not here to fix her, she said. You're here to stop losing yourself. And that stuck. Because that's what it had become, hadn't it? Not about revenge. Not even about betrayal anymore. But about the slow, quiet erosion of my own identity. Every eye roll, every snide joke at my expense, every time she turned a serious conversation into a performance, I'd let it chip away at me. And now here I was, in a room of soft walls and softer truths, rediscovering the voice I'd nearly let die. Marion didn't prescribe a solution. She didn't map out a recovery plan. She just reminded me that peace doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from clarity. And clarity is what I walked out with that day. The air outside felt different, lighter. Even the traffic noise didn't bother me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't planning a response, rehearsing a line, or bracing for her sarcasm. I was just breathing. I stopped at a small cafe down the block, ordered tea, and sat by the window. Watched people walk by, each carrying their own stories, their own quiet storms. And for once, I didn't feel like the sad man with a broken marriage. I felt like someone building a new truth. Back home, Jenny was exactly where I expected, on the couch, watching something mindless, feet tucked under her like a teenager. She looked up briefly when I walked in, then turned back to her show. She didn't ask where I'd been, and I didn't offer, because that, right there, that silence between us, was no longer a void I needed to fill. It was a sign that I was done asking to be heard. Now, I'd listened to myself. The scent of grilled ribs and hickory smoke clung to the July air as I carried a tray of corn on the cob out to the backyard. Our annual family barbecue was in full swing. Folding chairs clustered under string lights, nieces and nephews chasing each other barefoot across the grass, country music playing low from someone's portable speaker. Jenny was in her element, laughing loudly, topping off drinks, flipping her hair like a pageant queen as she charmed my Uncle Dave for the third time in 10 minutes. But I wasn't watching her anymore, not like I used to. Instead, I scanned the faces of the people who mattered, my parents, my sister, my cousin Greg with his clumsy jokes and kind heart. They deserved to hear it from me. With clarity, with composure, no drama, no fireworks, just truth. I waited until dessert, when everyone was full and lazy and relaxed. I set down my plate, stood up slowly, and gently clinked a spoon against my lemonade glass. The sound cut through the laughter, soft but deliberate. Heads turned. Jenny looked up from the fire pit, a glass of white wine halfway to her lips. I just wanted to say a quick word. I began. My voice was steady. No cracks. No bitterness. Just that strange calm that had been growing inside me ever since I left Marion's office. First, thank you all for being here. It means a lot, especially after the last few months. Life changes sometimes. Quietly at first, then all at once. A few curious glances passed around. My sister gave me a look, gentle, alert. Jenny's smile had faltered. I've made a decision, I continued. Jenny and I will be separating. Amicably. Gasps. Shifts in posture. The clink of someone setting down a fork. Jenny froze. We've grown apart. It happens. There's no scandal here. No villain. Just two people choosing honesty over pretending. Jenny stood abruptly. What are you? I raised a hand, just slightly. Jenny, please. She blinked. For a second, just one, I saw a panic flicker in her eyes. I wanted to say this now here because I respect this family, and I didn't want anyone finding out secondhand. Her mouth opened like she might object, but nothing came out. There it was, the moment she lost control of the narrative. I nodded gently. Thank you all for understanding. It's still fresh, and I asked for a bit of space. But I'll be okay. I sat back down. Jenny was still standing, still silent. The backyard had never felt so quiet. My mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. My uncle mumbled something supportive. A few people glanced at Jenny, expecting her to speak up, clarify, deny. But she just stared at me, lips parted slightly, utterly unprepared for the rug to be pulled from under her without a single raised voice. I didn't blame her. This wasn't the version of me she knew. This was someone new, someone unshakable. She finally sat down, hard, and took a long sip of her wine. No toast, no joke to recover the moment, just silence. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Not pity, not sadness, power. The kind that comes from holding your ground with grace, from telling the truth when it's hardest to do so, and most of all, from no longer needing her permission to speak. It started small. A vague status update on Jenny's profile. Some people pretend to be saints while quietly destroying everything. A day later, a photo of her wine glass, captioned, "Grateful for real friends and real conversations." Finally, by the end of the week, I was the villain in a quiet narrative only half told. She never named me, never needed to. She let the ambiguity do the work. Just enough sadness, just enough elegance. People filled in the blanks for her. That was her specialty. Friends began reaching out. Polite but probing texts. Hey, just heard things are a bit rough. You okay? Saw Jenny's post. Surprised, to be honest. You've always seemed like the calm one. I didn't reply, not out of pride, but because answering would have meant stepping into her arena. And I wasn't playing that game anymore. Jenny's version of events painted her as the abandoned woman, gracious, blindsided, valiantly trying to hold her life together while her cold, unfeeling husband turned into a ghost. And the thing is, some people believed her. At first. But silence has power. So does consistency. And I stayed consistent. No defensive rants. No veiled jabs. No passive-aggressive tweets. I showed up for work. I answered messages when necessary. I smiled when I had to. I kept my dignity like a jacket zipped up against the wind. It unsettled her. You could tell by the way she tried harder. Her tone sharpened. The posts became more specific. She began implying betrayal. Not cheating, nothing that blunt, but whispers. Some people don't have the courage to speak, so they vanish. Emotionally first, then physically. Still, I said nothing. Then one by one, people stopped asking. A few mutual friends dropped by my office, made excuses to grab coffee. I could tell they were looking for signs, rage, bitterness, breakdown. But instead, they found order. A clean desk, a calm face. Eventually, the calls to her stopped coming as often. The comments on her posts dwindled. People stopped playing audience to her play. It was subtle, but unmistakable. We were becoming invisible to each other in public, yet the shift in dynamic was all around us. I ran into our old friend Melissa at the hardware store one afternoon. We exchanged a quick hug. She didn't ask me what happened. Instead, she looked me square in the eyes and said, "You're handling this with so much grace." Honestly, it says everything. That stuck with me. It reminded me that neutrality wasn't weakness. It was choice. Jenny's campaign didn't implode with a bang. It simply ran out of fuel. You can't wage war with someone who doesn't swing back. And slowly, her words became an echo in an empty room. She still tried, occasionally. A dig here, a sigh there. Once she accidentally left a group chat open on her laptop while I walked by, a long paragraph visible. "He just gave up. He's not who I married. I think he's cold now. Maybe he always was." I didn't bite. I just walked out of the room, and the silence that followed was louder than any argument could have been. She expected a fire. What she got was fog. Unmovable, chilling, unyielding. And deep down, I think she started to realize the truth. You can't control someone who's no longer trying to stay. The keys to my new apartment felt heavier than I expected. Not in weight, but in meaning. There were only two on the ring, front door and mailbox. But they jingled with finality as I stepped into the empty space. The walls were bare. The hardwood floors creaked a little. There was no scent of lavender fabric softener or Jenny's imported candles. And somehow, that felt like freedom. I set my single duffel bag down by the wall and stood there for a long moment, letting the silence soak in. It wasn't the suffocating silence of our old kitchen, filled with unspoken disappointment. This was clean silence. Fresh. Unburdened. The first thing I bought was a coffee maker. Nothing fancy, just something to make mornings easier. The second was a set of blue curtains. Not because I needed them, but because I could choose something without debate, without snide commentary about aesthetic. I arranged the furniture slowly, deliberately. A small couch, a desk by the window, a bookshelf that stood proudly half empty for now. Every item I brought in was mine. No shared taste to navigate. No compromises in color or texture or placement. And each quiet decision I made stitched something back together inside me. Jenny didn't take the move well. She pretended it didn't matter. Said things like, "I'm sure this'll be good for you. Clearly you need space." But every polite text she sent afterward, "Did you mean to leave your passport? The toaster's still here if you want it," was laced with something she didn't say outright. Regret. Not the kind born from love lost, but from control slipping through her fingers like sand. I responded to each message with calm precision. No anger, no coldness, just distance. "Yes, I'll pick it up this week. No need for the toaster, thanks." It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was meant to be clear. This wasn't a phase. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something. I'd always thought peace would come with time, maybe even forgiveness. But I learned peace often comes with boundaries. And the strongest boundaries are the quietest ones. The apartment began to feel more like home with every passing week. I picked up a few plants, didn't even know the names of half of them, just liked the way they looked in the sunlight. I kept the place neat, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. I liked waking up to order, to space that wasn't packed with tension. Jenny still tried occasionally, called twice, left voicemails that were half update, half invitation. One even said, "We should talk," just for closure. I never returned the calls. Not because I hated her, because I finally understood something she never did. Closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from no longer needing them to explain why. Sometimes, you don't need an apology. You just need to no longer care whether one comes. I'd walk into my apartment each evening, the city humming quietly outside, and I'd feel it, a new rhythm. My rhythm. Books on the coffee table that I wanted to read. Music playing that no one rolled their eyes at. A couch that had never heard a single argument. That's what healing looked like for me. Not grand gestures or Instagram-worthy transformations. Just peace. Real, quiet, unshakable peace. It started with a letter. A formal-looking envelope slid through the mail slot one Tuesday morning, addressed to me with the usual legal formatting that turns your stomach before you even know why. At first, I thought it was routine, divorce paperwork updates, maybe a final round of signatures. But then I opened it, and what I found inside made my hands go cold. A financial claim, full of falsehoods, accusations of hidden accounts, withheld assets, even a bizarre line about unreported inheritance. It was like stepping into someone else's nightmare. And that someone was me. I sat on the edge of the bed in my quiet apartment, staring at the pages. The room was bright, the plants green and thriving, my bookshelf calm and ordered. But my head was spinning. I reread the document 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Then I picked up my phone and called my attorney. His office smelled like clean carpet and ink toner. Cool, detached, clinical. He wore wireframe glasses and spoke in complete sentences with no wasted words. He didn't panic when I showed him the claim. He just leaned forward, skimmed the lines, and said, "This is fabricated." That should have brought relief. But what it brought instead was a quiet, simmering sadness. Because this was Jenny's new play. Her last play, not with words or guilt or emotional manipulation, but with paper, with bureaucracy, with cold ink and false numbers. And maybe, deep down, it was never about the money. Maybe it was about watching me react. I didn't. Not to her, anyway. She sent a follow-up email 3 days later, laced with thin civility, just tying up loose ends. Hope we can handle this quickly and respectfully. I read it 3 times, then closed the browser and walked away from the screen. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was disappointed. Because even now, even after all the clarity and distance, part of me had held out hope that Jenny would walk away with grace, that she'd leave the battlefield clean instead of trying to poison the well behind her. But now here we were. Again. Only this time, I had shields she couldn't see. Every line of her claim was something I could disprove. I had the receipts, the documentation, the truth. But more importantly, I had perspective. This wasn't about fairness. This was about control. And she was grasping at the last threads of it. The lawyer and I worked late into that evening, sorting through years of shared finances, unearthing every legitimate transfer, every donation, every cent. It wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about ending this the right way, not with vengeance, but with precision. By the time I left his office, the sky outside was already dark, the streets slick with rain. I didn't feel angry. I felt resolved. You can't always stop someone from trying to hurt you, but you can make sure they fail. And that night, as I slid my key into the lock of my apartment, I realized something. She could throw anything she wanted at me, but I would not be rattled. I would not be shaken. And no lie she sent through the mail could rewrite who I had become. I always thought the legal system would be a cold place, efficient, procedural, emotionless. But when I stepped into that small office with its cheap blinds and paper-thin walls, I didn't expect how personal it would all feel. Jenny sat on the opposite side of the glass table. Her lawyer, a woman with perfect posture and perfectly hollow eyes, shuffled through the folder in front of her. My lawyer calmly pushed forward the documentation we'd spent weeks organizing. Bank statements, transaction logs, email receipts, screenshots, all neatly labeled, all airtight. The room was still, sterile. Jenny avoided my eyes. She wore a beige turtleneck and too much foundation. Her hands fidgeted under the table, nails freshly manicured, tapping lightly against her water glass. For a moment, I didn't see the woman who once called me her home. I saw someone clinging to the idea of being right, of winning. The accusations she'd filed, fraudulent, inflated, twisted, were now crumbling quietly under the weight of actual truth. Her lawyer cleared her throat. It seems, based on what Mr. Barnes has provided, that these claims can't be substantiated. Jenny didn't react, not visibly, but I saw it in the tiny movements, the twitch of her jaw, the way her shoulders dropped half an inch, the quiet unraveling of a strategy she'd once been so sure would work. My lawyer kept his voice even. We won't pursue damages for the false claims, assuming this ends today. Jenny's head turned, slow and deliberate. Her eyes finally met mine, and what I saw there wasn't anger. It was defeat, a soft, dull awareness that the tools she'd always used, words, implication, subtle cruelty, no longer held sway. Because I wasn't there to fight. I was there to finish. The paperwork was updated, revisions made, agreements signed. No drama, no shouting, just the mechanical clatter of pens across paper and the steady tick of a wall clock overhead. When it was done, I stood first, gave a courteous nod to her lawyer, gathered my folder, walked to the door. Jenny called my name once, softly, like it had weighed again. I turned, one hand on the doorknob. She didn't speak for a beat. Then, "You really aren't angry?" I tilted my head, considered her carefully. "No," I said. "That's the part you still don't get." And I left. The hallway outside was quiet, the carpet worn, the air stale. But each step I took away from that room felt like regaining ground I hadn't even realized I'd given up. By the time I reached the parking lot, I felt it fully. Freedom. Not the kind that comes with celebration or wild emotion, but the kind that settles into your bones. The kind that tells you, you did this the right way. With patience, with clarity, with dignity. That evening, I stopped by the market near my place and bought a bottle of wine. Not to toast her, not to grieve, but to mark the closing of something. I opened the windows. Let the night air drift in. Let the silence fill the room, not with sorrow, but with stillness. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives one day, uninvited, and sits down beside you like an old friend. I didn't notice it at first. It wasn't like Jenny disappeared overnight. It was slower than that, more gradual. One by one, her social media posts lost traction, less engagement, fewer likes, shorter comments. Her carefully curated digital world, once so loud and polished, now sat quieter by the day. Our mutual friends stopped mentioning her name, not out of malice, out of fatigue. Jenny had always been the center of the room, the orchestrator of conversations. But when people begin to doubt the story you're selling, when the tone doesn't match the truth, they start to pull away. I heard from Melissa again, months after the last barbecue. We met for coffee, sat by the window of a quiet shop tucked between two bookstores. She stirred her latte slowly, watching the foam swirl. "Jenny's not doing great," she said after a long pause. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. She's kind of isolated, not really showing up to things. Some people say she's been off. I nodded. Melissa reached out, touched my wrist lightly. "Whatever happened, how you handled it, Adam, it changed how people see you. In a good way." I didn't say much in response. Just thanked her. Changed the subject. But later that night, the words echoed. How I handled it. That was the quiet thread running through everything now. Jenny's credibility had eroded, not because I fought her narrative, but because I didn't. Because I let people observe. Let time do what confrontation never could. And time had been merciless. She'd exhausted her storyline. And when no one came rushing to validate it anymore, she faded. She stopped sending messages. Stopped showing up in circles we once shared. It wasn't dramatic. Just quiet. Like fog lifting from a field. I still saw her name occasionally, in emails about insurance or stray legal leftovers. But I no longer felt anything when I read it. That was the real closure. Not a final conversation. Not a grand apology. But the slow, undeniable proof that I had rebuilt something she could no longer reach. One evening, I ran into Greg, my cousin, the same guy who'd sat beside me during that barbecue when I made the announcement. He pulled me into a one-armed hug and said, "You look lighter, man." I didn't know what to say, just shrugged and smiled. Because I did feel lighter. Not because the pain had vanished, but because it wasn't carrying me anymore. It had burned through its fuel. And all that remained was a steadiness I hadn't known I could possess. Back at my apartment, I sat by the window with a book in my lap and a playlist humming low in the background. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting soft orange across the hardwood. Jenny hadn't won. She hadn't even stayed in the game. Because in the end, the real battle had never been with her. It had been with the part of me that once believed I needed her to feel whole. And that part had gone quiet too. The invitation arrived in a thick cream envelope with gold embossed lettering. Simple, elegant, the kind Jenny would have admired. It was from Emma, an old mutual friend from our early days, someone who'd watched our relationship bloom and then slowly wither from the sidelines. I almost didn't go, not because I was avoiding anyone, but because I wasn't sure what seeing Jenny again would mean, or if it meant anything at all. But in the end, curiosity won. Not about her, about me, about whether seeing her would stir anything in me that hadn't already been laid to rest. The wedding was in a vineyard just outside the city, sunlight slipping through rows of grapevines, the air thick with lavender and soft music. I wore a navy suit, stood near the back during the ceremony, and let the moment be what it was, about Emma and her joy. But after the vows, after the applause and the clinking of glasses, I saw her. Jenny. She was standing near the edge of the reception tent, a champagne flute in hand, her dress a little too formal for the occasion. Her smile was softer now, less curated. When she noticed me, there was a flicker across her face, recognition, hesitation, and then something else. Not regret, not hope, something like resignation. She crossed the lawn slowly, her heels crunching the gravel path. When she reached me, she didn't force a hug or a smile. Just nodded. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," I replied. A long silence passed, the kind that used to be filled with tension, but now it just felt calm. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure either." She looked down at her glass. "It's a nice wedding. Emma looks happy." "She does." More silence. Then she finally looked up, and there it was, something real in her expression. No mask. No performance. "I owe you an apology," she said, voice thin but clear. "Not for everything. I don't think one sentence could cover everything. But for the way I ended it. For the lies. For trying to make people choose sides." I didn't respond right away, because I wasn't sure what to say. So I told her the truth. "You don't owe me anything, Jenny. Not anymore." She blinked, a little stunned. "So you forgive me?" "I don't need to," I said. "It's not about that. I'm not angry. I'm not anything." She took a step back, not offended, just aware that whatever connection we once had been buried, not burned. We stood there for a moment longer, surrounded by laughter and clinking silverware and the beginning of someone else's forever. Then she said, "You look good. Happier." "I am." She nodded again, slowly this time, like she believed it. "Well, I hope that keeps being true." I gave a small smile. "It will." And then she turned, walked across the gravel path, and blended back into the reception. I stayed for a while longer. Toasted Emma. Caught up with old friends. Danced once. Left before dessert. The air was cooler by then. The night sky full of quiet stars. As I drove home, I didn't replay our conversation. Didn't second-guess anything I said or didn't say, because it was done. And some chapters don't end in explosions or echoes. Some end with a quiet nod and a final, certain peace. The wedding came and went. A week passed, then two. Jenny didn't call, and I didn't expect her to. Sometimes closure doesn't feel like a finish line. It feels like a door quietly clicking shut behind you. No drama, no final speech. Just a knowing. And I knew. I knew that whatever thread had once connected us had finally, definitively frayed to nothing. A few Sundays later, I stopped by the park near my apartment. Just needed fresh air and a break from the quiet hum of work emails and Spotify playlists. The sun was out. Golden. Gentle. Families dotted the grass. Kids rolled down small hills like laughter itself had taken on a shape. And I just watched. Then I saw her. Jenny. She was standing near the edge of the path, next to a vendor cart. Alone. No makeup this time. Hair tied back. A simple jacket. She looked ordinary. And for the first time, that didn't sting. She spotted me too. We both hesitated for a breath, and then I nodded. Nothing more. She gave the faintest wave, didn't move closer. Didn't need to. We weren't those people anymore. And somehow, that silent exchange, barely a few seconds long, held more honesty than most of our last year together. I turned and kept walking, hands in my pockets, each step easier than the last. That was it. Not a confrontation. Not a dramatic final kiss or some cinematic farewell. Just the recognition that we'd both made our choices. Hers had been to try and keep the upper hand, until it slipped through her fingers. Mine had been to let go of the rope. People always assume that letting go is weakness. That silence means defeat. But the truth is, sometimes walking away without a word is the most powerful thing you can do. Because you're no longer reacting. You're no longer orbiting around someone else's gravity. You're just walking in your own direction. That night, I sat on the balcony with a glass of water in hand, the city lights blinking steadily below. A soft breeze stirred the plants I'd kept alive for months now, small, quiet testaments to consistency. There was no more noise, no more explaining, no more calculating what her next move would be. And I realized something important. Healing isn't flashy. It's not always some triumphant return or viral moment of revenge. Sometimes, it's just the ability to breathe, to sit in your own space and feel still. I picked up a pen and jotted down a note in my journal. You don't have to destroy someone to be free of them. You just have to stop needing them to see you clearly. I closed the book, leaned back in my chair, and watched the sky darken without dread, without weight. Because I was done. Not broken, not bitter, just done. And finally whole. If you've ever been in a situation like Adam's, or found the strength to walk away quietly, leave a comment. What does peace look like to you now? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this, where dignity doesn't shout, but it always echoes. Thank you for walking this journey with me.